three things kind of through the lens of the institution that I work on now, and they are the role of science in the creation and transmission of knowledge, the place of that knowledge inside of this kind of disruptive, we'll call it a business model, but this disruption of the way that space science knowledge is acquired, and then contextually, what are the kind of, as a university, what are the business models, what are the funding models, all on one menu, instead of suggesting different things. So hopefully this will be interesting enough that we can, I'm hoping to go through this quickly and get a discussion going at the end. So I'm giving you all a clue more about what's that menu of funding options look like, and the menu of knowledge that we're trying to acquire, and of all the networking that we're doing now, what's the most efficient way to do it. So what do university researchers want? And this is true for almost anything, but in the space science context, there's a couple things that are really important there at the bottom. You need to be able to access the environment where the knowledge or the data will be obtained, and you need the infrastructure to do that. So in the context of what we're talking about now, it's kind of launch and how much does it cost to build an asset, and then acquire in a comm sense the information from that asset. But in a university context, let me be really clear that my context is a large, relatively young public university without an endowment. So we have our eye on our teaching mission all the time. But research and the knowledge portion of research that is part of the university mission is equally important. The ability to stay fungible in the big academy is important to anybody who does research, which means you need to be able to attract funding, you need to be able to deliver peer-reviewed results in a format that your colleagues recognize you for, as well as recognizing their ability to use them going forward, and you need to be able to convene and, if you will, explore new ideas. I mean, I think a lot of the thrill of being a researcher is the ability to find those moments where you're working together with others on something that you haven't thought about before, and neither have they, and oh, by the way, neither has anybody else. And then that builds entire careers. So I'm going to use the lens of Arizona State University, where I've been the vice president for research for 2 years. My personal background includes many years working as a space systems engineer for NASA, as well as many years as a developer of large space systems for the National Laboratory System. So I've worked in classified and unclassified environments. I've built very large programs and very tiny programs, and a whole bunch of that I'm happy to answer questions about. But the lens I'm going to use is this this sort of new, young, large, research-intensive university. So Arizona State University has a very long legacy of space exploration. I think most all of you know somebody there who has done, if you don't know Phil Christensen, you should, and Jim Bell and Lindy Elkins-Stanton. So most of Arizona State University's research background in space exploration has been planetary exploration for the most part. So I'm going to now dive through the lens of the kind of disruption that ASU itself is engaging in the higher education front. And those of you that are in higher education are probably aware of some aspect of ASU. It may be just being annoyed at it for being an institution that's upending some pieces of the higher education paradigm. But I'm going to do that through the lens of knowledge. So if knowledge is the core value proposition for a university, both in the context of who we teach, who we train, and the research we do, and the knowledge that we transmit, and I'm going to show a complicated slide for a reason. This is from Michael Crow presentation at Global Silicon Ventures Conference recently. You can find this on the ASU President's website. It actually is an explication of how we at ASU literally think and drive education innovation. So realm one, I'm not going to talk about them all, is what you would think of as a normal, full immersion. Students go to classes, they are on campus, they are technology enhanced, all the way through digital immersion to not even being together physically, to what we call education through exploration. I'm going to talk a little bit about that because it is co-informed at Arizona State University by our School of Earth and Space Exploration. So we work both the skill sets of the students as well as the knowledge together. Some of those I put a circle around, some of the things we are thinking about, not doing at the moment, in terms of educating through exploration by delivering experience and content in a VR sense, looking at cognition literally in terms of understanding what is being learned and how, intelligent tutoring, which really goes back to a sense from, what's the book about the young lady's primer, sorry, someone will know the name of it, a book written in 1993 about a learning device that you get when you're born, and it thank you, follows you all the way through. So in the context of learning through exploration and education through exploration, we very recently kicked off something called the Interplanetary Initiative. It's really new, and it has a lot of components, but it's run by Lindy Elkins-Tanton, who is also the director of the School of Earth and Space Exploration. The School of Earth and Space Exploration, I might add at ASU, is this kind of classic ASU construct where we threw all the sticks up in the air and looked at them as they were coming down and said which things actually belong together today in this environment as opposed to 20 years ago or even 20 years in the future. And we put our earth sciences, our space sciences, and our space systems engineers all together in one school. Among other things, what we are doing in that school as part of the Exploration Initiative and the Interplanetary Initiative is we are in the process of planning to flip the entire curriculum of that school. So what that means is that every class, if you are a major as an undergraduate in that school, will ultimately be what you might think of if you have a K-12 kid in a project-based learning school as project-based learning. They all look different depending on the content, but lectures and homework will be done digitally and offline, not in the classroom. That'll get kicked off sometime in the next year or so, but we expect to see things like this in every classroom, no matter what the size is, and faculty are actively developing what those classroom experiences will be like. So we use this big lens of exploration. We are experimenting with pedagogy, if you will, exploration pedagogy in the School of Earth and Space Exploration, in part to kind of ask ourselves, how do we do this across the entire university? How do we actually educate through exploration no matter what the discipline is? And I'm telling you all of this because it's a lens, again, I'm using the word lens a lot, but I'm trying to neck us down to a set of initiatives that we've started. One is called the New Space Initiative. And Tanya, are you here? So Tanya, way up in the back, Tanya Harrison is one of our core team members in the New Space Initiative. We started New Space about maybe even 5 years ago, talking about it. We kicked it off in 2013. The goal was really, and we've done a lot of things which I'll talk about, but the idea was to have early and intentional engagement with this disruptive business model that's developing with new space companies, tiny ones, large ones, whatever. Our goal, frankly, is to look back in 20 or 30 years and have our students as core members of the companies that have succeeded, whatever they're doing. And so we do that in a lot of ways. We work with endeavors like Boldly Go to examine what are the kind of consortium, what are the new kinds of business models that we can develop around research endeavors, how do we get our students involved in that, but we also develop various different flavors of partnerships, and I say that because it is my office that ends up actually where the business deal has to get done with all of these entities is in my office, and we do tiny little MOUs to great big formalized contracts. We figure out what needs to happen and really are driving those engagements from the perspective of what's the joint value proposition between us and them. We have, actually the key relationship line can be a lot larger now, lots more smaller companies developing, some our own students are developing. So this is my last slide, and this is kind of where I'd actually like to engage in not only give and take, but a discussion. So when I look at innovative funding and all of the things that are happening here, we were early partners with Boldly Go, not only from the perspective of our PIs having core research connection with their missions, but looking at that as a model. But we look at all, we get approached as consortium member, and and the definition of that is all over the map. And we have to ask ourselves at every step, what's the value in the place where we're at as a center of higher learning in terms of disruption? What's the value to our students? What's the value to our faculty? What's the value to the research, the knowledge that we're helping to create? And what's the value to transmitting that knowledge? Shared governance, I will tell you, is when you're really down and dirty, it's one of the biggest challenges because there's no common model. I don't mind that, but I live in a world where that's supposed to be okay, and I have an entire team that works on this kind of thing. I think it's really challenging if you don't come from the large-scale research and teaching environment that I do. The ownership of knowledge, I brought this up yesterday, I think it's worthy of a much longer and enduring conversation, is what does that mean as the assets change, as the funding of those assets, and I'm talking about the assets through which knowledge is acquired, data is acquired, the assets through which data is turned into knowledge become a conglomerate mix of different flavors of ownership. What does that, what do we as a community actually want to bring to the table now and ensure as we go forward over even a decade that we own the conversation in a way that enhances our ability to create and transmit knowledge? That's my perspective. Charitable giving opportunities, I'll make, so this is something that everybody who's been in the hard sciences for a long time knows that dollars are dropping. The ability to fund, in particular, the most expensive assets that we bring to bear in science is falling off very, very quickly. So we're, in many cases, not just at universities, but at national labs and other agglomerations of scientists, we're using a lot of old assets to continue to do new science, and the funding for new expensive assets and the governance models for those is challenging. It's a really new world for national laboratories, but many of them have created foundations. They don't, frankly, know exactly what to do with them. It's not a funding model that they've ever had to deal with, but they're doing it because some of the science that their cadre of scientists want to pursue is very difficult to pursue now. And so when I talk about creating operations options inside the university, I'm really talking about creating literally the business capacity to do what we might characterize as deals. That's not a fair moniker, but to do all these things and allow us as an institution to not only experiment as much as possible, but to who used the surfing analogy, but to surf as much as possible and as well as possible as disruption is happening in our core business model, which is higher education, as well as in research business models that we care about. So that's all I have at the moment. And I encourage us to talk. I'm happy to answer questions if there are any, but I also encourage us to take this forward.
I just wanted I want to point out the CAC grant that I mentioned, so I didn't come in last year for Clarkson, actually had a national lab as a partner, Argonne. Normally CAC does not fund the national labs. The guy at Argonne had a faculty position at the University of
Yeah, so this is, some national labs can do this and are discovering, as to their contracts turn over every 5 years. This is maybe too much in the weeds, but they're now discovering that the value of having a university as a core M&O contract owner is that your staff can now have faculty positions and therefore bid for. And that just means, by the way, that for all of us that are in the university world, we now have a different flavor of competition. We weren't competing with lab researchers, particularly a decade ago, and we are now. Anybody else? Erica?
So, Betsy, as you think about these private space science missions and how that is a part of the ASU's broader portfolio, are there boundaries on what portion of the academic enterprise that can take, or are there other ways to think about how that fits into the broader life of the university?
So I absolutely have a do no harm to the academic side of the house. That means two things. That means do no harm to our ability to educate, and it also means do no harm to researchers as individuals. I mean, one thing we really have to recognize about university research environments is that it is kind of the worship, if you will, of the individual. It is a massive challenge for me to take the construct of a modern university and ask it to not only come together around big ideas, which is something that ASU is very good at, but also figure out how to deliver those, turn those into knowledge that actually has some meaningful endpoint in which I have 10 faculty members contributing from across multiple disciplines with their students. It's not impossible, but that's probably my biggest challenge. I don't know if that exactly answered the question, but I have to start from do no harm to what we have told everybody that we will deliver, which is kids who know how to do something and work in the world. Anybody else? Thank you.
I have one more question. Maybe. Yeah. So, how do you balance short-term funded ongoing projects versus endowed institutes? Because sometimes when you have a goal you will reach in 40 years, 3-year renewable grants are deadly dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah. So we don't actually have endowed institutes the way most, because Arizona State University itself is an old university, but in 2000 it was a third the size of what it is now. So it's unusual in it's more like a bizarre form of educational startup that's huge. So the answer to your question is all of those monies come through me, whether they're from foundations, if they're research oriented, or they're from the state. We have a state, so we have all these different flavors. And I actually have a committee that looks at what are our long-term, medium-term, and short-term goals, and then how are we funding those.
Do you envisage becoming a space university like Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University?
I do distinguish between aeronautics and space because frankly, the underlying physical assets and the world of having to get outside the gravity well versus operate inside it are really. Can you tell I'm a mechanical engineer?
But all it does is aeronautics.
It is. Yes. No. I don't envision us. No, not at all. No, if we aren't utilizing this exploration capacity to drive the humanities, to drive the social sciences, to drive the arts, then we're not doing it right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.